Daniel Cross and Emily Hart never imagined their lives would end in tragedy, but one man's secret would destroy everything. Daniel Cross seemed like the kind of man who had life figured out. To everyone in his small town, he was the image of stability, a father of two who took pride in raising his children and being there for his wife, Laura. On weekday mornings, he packed his daughter's school lunch and kissed her on the head before driving her to class. On weekends, he stood proudly on the sidelines of the soccer field, shouting encouragement at his son's games. At church, he sat in the same wooden pew every Sunday, hand in hand with his family, nodding respectfully during the sermon. His neighbors would often wave as he mowed his lawn, his two kids running around in the yard while Laura set out lemonade. The Cross household looked calm, safe, and full of love. Daniel's work as a local contractor only reinforced his reputation. He had built homes for families in the community, leaving behind not only houses, but also trust. People described him as hard-working and reliable, the kind of man who could be called in the middle of the night if something in your home went wrong. He smiled often, his voice steady and warm, making clients feel reassured. He was well liked at the hardware store, where he greeted staff by name, and he often helped elderly neighbors with small repairs, never asking for payment. From the outside, Daniel's life appeared not just ordinary, but admirable. Inside his home, the story seemed to match the image. Family photos lined the walls, vacations at the beach, Christmas mornings filled with wrapping paper, birthdays with cakes smothered in candles. Laura often told friends that she was lucky to have a husband who cared so deeply about family. He tucked the children into bed every night, read them stories, and asked about their dreams for the future. The couple attended school meetings together, discussed college savings, and planned road trips. There was nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that would make anyone question his devotion. But in every life that looks too perfect, there are hidden layers waiting to surface. Daniel carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who had built walls no one could see through. When people praised him for being such a family man, he smiled, but never revealed the weight he felt behind that mask. He was balancing more than his neighbors or wife could ever imagine. At first, it was easy for him to believe that he could manage it all: his marriage, his children, his reputation, and the secret he kept buried beneath the surface. It was this quiet confidence that fooled everyone. No one noticed the way his phone sometimes buzzed late at night when Laura was asleep, or how he occasionally disappeared under the excuse of work emergencies. No one questioned why he seemed distracted during some Sunday services or why he occasionally came home later than expected. To the world, Daniel was the perfect father and husband. No one could have predicted that beneath the polished image of the reliable family man was a man living two lives, carefully separated but destined to collide in the most destructive way imaginable. 2 towns away from the Cross family home, another story had been quietly unfolding. Daniel had met Emily Hart during a renovation project at a law office where she worked as a paralegal. At first, it seemed harmless: brief exchanges about schedules, light conversations about the project, and polite smiles across the office hallways. But those conversations began to stretch longer. Emily was drawn to Daniel's charm, the way he carried himself with confidence and steadiness. Unlike the younger men she knew, he seemed grounded, established, someone who could provide comfort and security. Daniel, on the other hand, found in Emily a spark he hadn't felt in years. She was younger, adventurous, and endlessly curious about him. What began as small talk soon slipped into something much more dangerous. The affair started quietly: a lunch together here, a coffee after work there. Daniel told himself it was just friendship, but as weeks turned into months, the bond deepened. Emily fell deeply in love with him, believing his promises of a future together. Daniel spoke of unhappiness in his marriage, of the pressures of being a husband and father, of a life where he felt trapped. To Emily, he painted himself as a man longing for escape, waiting for the right moment to break free. She listened, believed, and began to imagine herself stepping into the role of the woman who would save him from that life. Their meetings grew bolder. Daniel would drive 2 towns over to avoid recognition, slipping into Emily's apartment late at night or during supposed work trips. For almost 2 years, he managed to keep both lives neatly separated. At home, he was still the devoted father, helping with homework, laughing at the dinner table, and holding Laura's hand at neighborhood gatherings. With Emily, he was the romantic partner, whispering promises, sharing hotel rooms, and weaving stories about a future where they could be together openly. The double life was exhausting, but Daniel thrived on the secrecy. It gave him a sense of control, a belief that he could bend reality to fit his desires. But secrets always carry a weight, and Daniel's burden began to grow heavier. Emily's patience wore thin as time passed. She had given her heart completely, believing Daniel when he swore he would leave his wife. She watched the months turn into years, frustrated that nothing changed. Her friends noticed her growing unhappiness and asked questions she could not answer. In her messages to Daniel, her tone shifted from hopeful to desperate, then to angry. She wanted clarity. She wanted commitment. She wanted the life she had been promised. Daniel, caught between the comfort of his family and the passion of his secret lover, began to feel the walls closing in. Co-workers noticed he seemed distracted, sometimes irritable. Laura began asking why he worked late so often, though he brushed off her suspicions with easy excuses. Even neighbors started to whisper, not about an affair, but about how tired he seemed, how unlike himself he looked. The double life that had once energized him now left him restless, paranoid, and fearful of discovery. Emily, meanwhile, decided she could no longer wait in silence. She began pressing him harder, telling him that time was running out. She wanted action, not more empty promises. To Daniel, this was not only pressure but a threat. He had built a perfect image in his community, a life others envied, and now that image hung in the balance. Every message, every demand from Emily felt like a crack forming in the carefully constructed facade he had worked so hard to protect. What started as an intoxicating secret was now a dangerous game that Daniel could no longer control. When Emily finally delivered her ultimatum, Daniel felt his carefully built world begin to tilt. She told him that she could no longer be hidden away, no longer be the secret shadow in his life. She wanted a choice. Either he left his wife and children to build a future with her, or she would walk away for good. For Daniel, it was not simply about losing Emily. It was about what her leaving could mean. He feared she might reveal their relationship, that whispers could turn into gossip, and gossip could turn into public disgrace. He imagined his children hearing about their father's betrayal, his wife's face when the truth surfaced, and the respect he had earned in his community crumbling overnight. The pressure mounted with every passing day. Emily's messages became more frequent, her frustration sharper. She began asking why he had not moved forward with his supposed plans. She spoke of wasted years, of her life being placed on hold while he continued living comfortably with his family. For Daniel, every word felt like a tightening noose. At home, he found it increasingly difficult to hide the tension. He snapped at his children for small mistakes, avoided long conversations with Laura, and spent more time outside the house under the guise of late work. His heart raced constantly, weighed down by the thought that exposure was just around the corner. On a crisp autumn evening, when the air carried a chill and the leaves scattered across the roads, Daniel made his decision. He invited Emily to meet him, promising her that they would finally talk seriously about their future. He suggested a drive, telling her he wanted to show her something away from the noise of the city. Emily, clinging to hope despite her doubts, agreed. She believed that this might finally be the moment he proved his love, that he would finally take the steps he had long promised. Daniel picked her up in his dark-colored truck and steered away from town, heading toward an unfinished construction site he managed on the edge of a rural road. The area was isolated, surrounded by half-built structures and fields that stretched into darkness. The hum of the engine filled the silence as Emily sat beside him, unaware of the thoughts swirling in his mind. To her, it was a night that could change everything for the better. To him, it was the night he decided to erase the threat to his carefully constructed life. Under the cold glow of a half-hidden moon, Daniel carried out the act he believed would bury his secret forever. The unfinished building stood silent as he turned the place into a scene of violence, leaving behind the woman who had once believed in his every promise. When it was over, he lingered only long enough to ensure that no trace of him seemed obvious. Then, with the same calm face he had worn so many times before, he returned to his truck and drove away. By dawn, Daniel was back in his warm home. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, his children's voices filled the air, and Laura greeted him as though nothing was amiss. He smiled, forcing normalcy into his expression, and sat at the breakfast table. No one in that moment could have imagined where he had been the night before. To them, he was still the loving father and husband, unchanged, reliable, and present. Yet beneath that mask, a darker truth had already been sealed. Emily's sudden disappearance quickly captured attention. She was known among her friends as dependable, the kind of person who never missed work without notice and always kept in touch. When she failed to show up at her office the following morning, her co-workers grew worried. Calls to her phone went unanswered, and by evening, her closest friend filed a missing person report. For the first time, Daniel's hidden world began to shift into the light. Investigators started with Emily's apartment. Her car was still parked outside, keys and purse inside, as if she had never planned to leave for long. The only thing missing was her phone. But when detectives examined her call history, they found that many recent messages had been deleted. It appeared deliberate, as though someone wanted to erase a trail. Neighbors reported hearing her leave the night before with a man, but no one had seen his face clearly. To those who knew her, the only explanation was that she had gone to meet someone important. Detectives retraced her final hours, pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses. Most cameras showed nothing unusual, but one grainy clip from a convenience store parking lot revealed a vehicle, resembling Daniel S.'s truck passing by around the time Emily was last seen. It was not enough to confirm anything, but it gave investigators a direction. They began searching for more evidence, combing through gas stations and highway cameras along the route. What they uncovered next became the first solid crack in Daniel's carefully built alibi. At a gas station several miles from the construction site, a receipt was time-stamped at the exact hour Emily vanished. The name tied to the credit card was Daniel Cross. The station's security footage confirmed it. His truck parked by the pump, his figure faintly visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. For detectives, it was the first undeniable link between Daniel and the night Emily disappeared. When questioned, Daniel appeared calm, almost too calm. He explained that he had been working late at one of his sites and had stopped for fuel on the way home. He denied ever seeing Emily that night and claimed he had not been in touch with her for months. His steady tone and composed demeanor might have convinced some, but investigators had already begun digging deeper. They subpoenaed his phone records, and what they found further unraveled his story. Cell tower data placed his phone in the same vicinity as Emily S. during the crucial hours of her disappearance. Though many of their messages had been erased, fragments recovered from Emily S.'s cloud backup painted a picture of a heated exchange in the days leading up to that night. Her words demanded action, his replies were vague, but the tension between them was unmistakable. Detectives returned to the construction site Daniel mentioned in his alibi. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but after a thorough search, they found fragments of clothing fibers tangled near the foundation of an unfinished building. Forensic analysis later confirmed they matched Emily's belongings. Piece by piece, the puzzle was falling into place, and the image of Daniel as a faithful family man was beginning to crack. Neighbors, once convinced of his spotless reputation, were stunned as word spread that police were questioning him. His wife, Laura, struggled to process the sudden cloud over her husband's character. For investigators, though, the picture was becoming clearer. Emily's disappearance was no accident, and Daniel Cross was no longer simply a family man. He was now the prime suspect in a case that threatened to shatter every illusion he had so carefully maintained. The trial of Daniel Cross drew national attention, shaking the quiet town that had once admired him. Courtrooms were packed with reporters, neighbors, and those who had followed the case from the very beginning. People wanted answers. How could a man who appeared so devoted to his family be accused of murdering the woman he claimed to love? From the start, the prosecution painted a picture of duplicity, obsession, and premeditation. They laid out a sequence of events, supported by cell phone records, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence recovered from the construction site. Each piece of proof chipped away at the image of the perfect father and husband, revealing a man who had led a double life with devastating consequences. As the trial unfolded, witnesses testified about Emily's growing frustration in the weeks before her disappearance. Friends recalled her insisting that Daniel would finally make a choice, while co-workers described her increasing anxiety over messages that were mysteriously deleted or ignored. Investigators walked the jury through the timeline of Daniel's movements, highlighting inconsistencies in his statements and the carefully calculated steps he had taken to cover his tracks. The gas station receipt, the cell tower data, and the clothing fibers created an undeniable link between Daniel and the night Emily vanished. Every detail revealed the premeditated nature of his actions, eroding any sympathy the jury might have held for the once respected contractor. In the courtroom, the focus gradually shifted from the evidence itself to the man behind it. His wife, Laura, sat stoically, her face a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. Friends and neighbors watched silently, struggling to reconcile the smiling man they had known with the man now exposed as a murderer. The defense attempted to frame Daniel as a man under extreme pressure, suggesting he had panicked rather than planned. They argued that his intentions were never violent and that the disappearance had been an accident gone wrong. But each theory was systematically dismantled by the prosecution, whose timeline and forensic analysis left little room for doubt. The tension in the courtroom reached its peak when the prosecution presented the final piece of evidence, a reconstructed timeline placing Daniel at the construction site alongside Emily at the exact time of her murder. Combined with his attempts to erase messages and establish a seemingly perfect alibi, the narrative of control and calculated decision-making became impossible to ignore. As the jury reviewed the evidence, murmurs filled the gallery. People who had once trusted him now saw the chilling reality, a man who had manipulated everyone around him, whose desire to maintain appearances had overridden his morality and compassion. When the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom was silent, guilty on all counts. Daniel Cross, once the symbol of suburban perfection, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal. A husband, a father, a neighbor, and a friend had committed an unthinkable act. Emily's family, though devastated, finally felt a measure of justice. Daniel's fall from grace served as a grim,